Welcome to Mormon Land, a podcast all about the news and culture of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Senior Managing Editor Dave Noyce. I oversee the Salt Lake Tribune's faith coverage. I'm joined by Senior Religion Reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack. Hi, Peggy.
Hi, Dave.
Before we start, here's a quick ask. We invite you to go to patreon.com, where you can access all of the Tribune's faith coverage, podcast transcripts, and the full Mormon Land newsletter. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Mormonland. And if you haven't already, please follow us on Instagram at mormon.land. Now for today's show. As a candidate, he promised, quote, mass deportations of undocumented immigrants. And now, as president, he is setting the wheels in motion in an effort to do just that. While President Donald Trump's next move, and that of immigration enforcement agents, is uncertain, this much is sure. The country is on edge. So much so that the governing First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints expressed concern about the, quote, complex challenges and hardships now faced by members who are undocumented immigrants living in the United States. And they outlined guidelines for the faith's local lay leaders to follow. Questions abound. The church stresses obedience to the law, but how does that jibe with its desire to show compassion to all of God's children and keep families together? How do human-made borders have any relevance in a divinely created world without such barriers? And at a basic level, how far should a church with a rich immigrant history go in supporting or resisting a sweeping crackdown? Joining us remotely to discuss the issues are Sam Brunson, a Latter-day Saint law professor who has written recently about the topic, and Aracala Herrera Urena, a Latter-day Saint immigrant from the Dominican Republic who lives near Atlanta and is now a U.S. citizen. Aracala and Sam, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're so glad to have you with us. Aracala, let's start with you, and maybe you could share with our listeners briefly about your personal story, about how you immigrated to the U.S. and what it took to become a citizen.
Well, yes. So I came here when I was 16. 15, actually. That was around 2006. And my aunt, she got married with a U.S. citizen. She immigrated here. Then she petitioned for my grandma and my granddad. Before we came here, before my grandma gets to the interview, my granddad passed away 1 week before. So, it was a little bit uncertain what will happen with the case. But then, back then, everything was easier. My grandma, they allowed my grandma to go alone. She got her status. She come here with the residents. And after that, then in the same appointment, I believe she petitioned her other 12 more kids. So between that time, I was like 3 years old, I believe. And between that time, all my aunts and uncles, they will come in until it was my mom's turn. So when the case got to her, when she was petitioned, she was, how do you say that? Like she didn't have any husband or any kids. So now, when that happens, like it was her turn. She already has us. We are four kids, with her, and she included us. And like happily, she got the acceptance. Like everyone could come together. That's what I love about that time, about U.S. Like it was family, union. One of my sister couldn't come because she was already married, and that's another family. That's what they tell us. So all the other kids, my one sister, my other brother, and me, we came with my mom, and after that. We came here in Orlando. We got our residence, and 5 years later, I could apply for become U.S. citizen. And I did all my research. I was in high school here. It was a blessing for me. This country has been a blessing for me. My sister, eventually, the other one that was married, my mom could petition for her. She's actually here already with all her kids too, and we're united. And that's basically my story. And it is so different right now. It's so different right now, but that's basically how I immigrate to.
Yeah. Were you a Latter-day Saint when you came, or?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. When did you become a Latter-day Saint?
I became when I think it's almost 10 years ago.
Okay.
I believe. Yeah. And that was because my sister. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Ercala, what are you hearing? You just said it's not the same now as it was. What are you hearing from the immigrant community where you live, especially church members?
Yes. Well, right now it's not the same. Like right now, let's just set an example. Like if my mom petitioned for me and my brothers or sisters, then it's not gonna be like the same. Like she can petition for everyone. She had to petition. I believe it's each of us separate. I believe it's not like before. Like my grandma. My grandma could petition all her kids in one big case back then. And I mean that's what they tell me. And right now it's so difficult. It's so expensive. It took so long, and over there it took long, because my grandma was a resident, but for a citizen, it should not be taking that long. And then also, when you go to the interview over there, you have to even take DNA samples because they don't trust anymore. Like your family, it's been down. Like my mom, she has to take a DNA test. By the time we're about to come here, so it's very different right now. Like one friend, she petitioned for her husband. Her husband is a Mexican, and for her husband to go to the interview, then he has to do a lot of things to get in there. And also when he get there, like it's up to the interviewer if he come here or not, like if the marriage is good or not, even though they've been married for 16 years. Yeah. So they
do you think that is there a lot of fear in the community right now, like among your friends or people you work with?
Yes.
Do you sense a lot of fear about immigration?
Yes, a lot. I just had a conversation with one of my friends. She's from Dominican Republic. She was so afraid to petition for her boyfriend. She say, "Oh no, they're not gonna believe it. They're not. I don't want to waste this money that I can invest in my wedding. But then it's so difficult. He lives there. I had to be with him. I don't know if I wanted to go there and leave the Dominican Republic because I have my job here. I mean, all my life." And I was telling her, "Just do it, and let's just pray and trust God." Trust our Heavenly Father and just do it. But it's the fear, it's the fear that just because it's so hard right now for immigrants, just to think about being together with their families. It's not about just coming here and make money. It's I think it's a 90% it's to be with the family, to be united.
So, Sam, we're going to keep on the micro level for a bit here now. What effect, if any, is this having in your Latter-day Saint congregations in Chicago and places like that?
So, on Monday of this week, it was a day without immigrants, apparently a national or a multi-city day where immigrants don't go to work, don't go to school, don't shop at businesses. My wife teaches in Chicago public schools. And she tells me that yesterday, the classes that she taught, and this is public school, so the classes generally should have 29 to 32 students. she didn't have any classes with more than 10 or 15 students. One of her classes only had 3 students. So there is, and what I'm seeing in the ward that I attend, we have historically over the last 2 years had a lot of Venezuelan and Latin American refugees and immigrants. We have fewer these days because the shelters that were close to our congregation have been closed. But talking to some of our friends who have legal status, they're here with 5-year status as refugees. The father's afraid to let his son go out because he doesn't want his son to be swept up accidentally or deliberately. In our congregation, these immigrant members have been a critical and a vital part of the congregation. The ward next to ours, the one just north of us, has actually a lot of African immigrants and refugees. We had more Latin American. And they are a big part of the ward. They're a big part of the life of the church here. They participate. They pay tithing. We've had wonderful celebrations with them. And this idea that they're scared and unable to even attend church, I think is damaging personally for them, for me personally, and for the church.
So, Erica, do you go to a Spanish-speaking ward?
Right now, no. I'm right now Crabapple ward. Crabapple is English, but they have inside classes in Spanish. Yeah, so I attend both. Yeah, because my daughters, they both got both language.
Oh, that's nice. Do you have you guys in your family ever received any help from the church?
Yes, we did, and we're so glad. So glad that we found leaders that care actually, and that are willing to help, in an organization like the church, that can help people like me, myself. I can say before I saw the church help my sister. And that for me was one of the things, that make me think about the church. And for me, I've been financially affected. When it happened, it was I don't remember exactly what was back then, but it was a hurricane that came. I don't remember when it was, but my husband had to, he didn't work for a week, actually 2 weeks, and it was very hard for us to pay. We were behind on bills and things that we need to pay, and church helped me. They help us with food, and it was a lifesaver. And I actually wanted to say something about what you were talking about, Sam. My daughters, she let's say I think it was 5 days ago. I had to sit her down and calm her because she was freaked out. She was say, "Mom, I don't want to go to school. I wanted to stay home because I don't want us to get separated." That's what she was telling me. And I say, you don't have to fear. You don't have to do that. Don't worry. I explained to her. I tried to explain to her because for me, it was so difficult to explain to her what is going on and why, because she was asking me why they had to do that, because she was watching the news with us. So I had to stop watching the news with my daughters because they have this fear to go to school. Yeah.
So, Sam, that brings us when Erica talked about some of the assistance that you blogged about this. What positives did you see in the First Presidency guidelines that they issued to local leaders last week in dealing with these issues, and what did you see as negatives that were in those instructions?
So I think the instructions, by and large, are troubling. They demonstrate that the church is concerned about the well-being of bishops and local leaders, which is a good thing. But The church policy that they send out changes previous policy. Previously, the church provided some amount of housing and other assistance to people who needed it, irrespective of immigration status. And these new guidelines from last week say that where a bishop has reason to believe that someone is undocumented, that they should provide no or limited housing assistance, shouldn't provide transportation, and shouldn't provide work recommendations. And the church says it's doing this to limit the potential criminal liability of bishops and of other church leaders who provide this type of care. And so in my mind, this is bad for a couple reasons. One is because it doesn't actually provide, on my reading, any additional protection to bishops. The law, I go into this a fair amount by common consent in a handful of blogs that I've done, but essentially the criminal statute that they're looking at it criminalizes harboring undocumented immigrants, where harboring might mean providing shelter, but for you to meet this harboring requirement, you have to know or recklessly disregard the fact that they're undocumented. The ACLU about 8 or 9 years ago issued a memo to churches, and in the memo they said, if you're concerned about this but you want to provide aid, here's a handful of things that you can do. And one of their big recommendations was make it a policy not to ask about immigration status, make it a policy to provide charity, provide housing or food or clothing or whatever, as long as a person meets your criteria. They didn't say no criteria. The church could certainly say primarily to people who are baptized members of the church or whatever. But the ACLU's recommendation was don't ask about and don't differentiate immigration status. So from the bishop's point of view, I'm concerned about this, because if there's this idea that they should, if they suspect someone's undocumented, they should provide no or less aid, that would suggest that there's some reason that they should know the immigration status of congregants, of ward members, which, that kind of takes away one of the legitimate defenses they have. And it also, I think, hurts our undocumented brothers and sisters, because it does say that they will it will be harder for them to get housing assistance when they need housing assistance, in a way, in contrast to members of the church who need that housing assistance, but are nothing about them suggests they're undocumented immigrants. On top of that, I think that the church, could go the Quaker route. I think that there's a strong religious liberty claim that targeting people at church, criminalizing the ability of a church to offer religiously mandated aid, probably doesn't meet the constitutional tests. I wouldn't stake everything on that, but I would be pretty comfortable being a test case there.
Sam, I was wondering when I read that it said, and you talked about this, bishops, if they believe someone may be undocumented, that troubled me, because it sounds like bishops are then sort of, forgive me, profiling their congregants, but it's really not that. It's actually to protect. So if they just treat, what you're saying is it actually offers protection, because they can just then give aid on their usual way they normally would, right?
So I'm saying, if there were no such policy, if we continued with the old policy of just providing aid, then there would be no reason that a bishop would know or suspect that someone was undocumented. And to your point, the profiling, there's nobody who's going to look at me, a white middle-aged American, and say he's undocumented. So it does suggest, deliberately, I doubt, but at least accidentally, that we should be profiling based on racial categorizations, which also I find, whether deliberate or not, kind of not great.
Yeah. Because no one can look at anybody and say, oh, that person's documented and that person's undocumented. That's impossible.
No, actually, I can't think of a single way that you can do that. One of the superpowers of the United States is that we have so many immigrants, that we look and act and speak and cook and have backgrounds in so many different ways based on so many different places, that it is impossible to look at someone and know whether they're documented or not. You know, you could have the white Scandinavian immigrant who overstayed their visa and they are technically undocumented, but I can't tell just looking at them. You could have the person of Mexican descent whose family's been in the United States and citizens for 5 generations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to both of you, how can the church say or do both sustain the law and at the same time help their undocumented members? Ercala?
Well, what I can say is, for me, I mean, from my point of view, is that profiling, it hurts. It hurts a lot. Feel that you've been profiled it hurts a lot. Like, and this happens yesterday, just yesterday. God is my witness. We were trying to buy a sandwich yesterday at a place. I don't know if I said it this way, but everybody tell that restaurant is a redneck restaurant. That's what they said. So we went there to buy some sandwich, some pulled pork sandwich. We were there and we were waiting on the table for our food. And these 4 men enter. They sit down a little bit next to us, in front of us. And by the time we receive our food, I was checking it, and I hear one of them ask the other one with the phone, and he had a phone, because I was looking at the girl on the counter, and I hear him say, "Did you call ICE already?" And he say, "Yes, I did." So I was like, I couldn't believe this has happened to me, and that was yesterday. I grabbed my stuff. I was already leaving because I was just checking a sandwich, and I leave, and then I was like, this is incredible. I was the only person there that you might think is not, American or citizen or something. So it hurts. It hurts when you feel like someone do that to you. For my point of view, what the bishop should do is, when they're talking about with this person, is that they don't have control about and then we had to obey laws. Even if it hurts, it's something truth. It's not like profiling. Profiling comes from inside a person's point of view, and the law and obey the laws comes from God. So I don't think, I mean, for me, it's better to tell the person the position and not be thinking, or because at the end of the day, that's profiling. When you think, because a person, that's exactly what you say, Sam, about a person that might be here, 5 generations. That's the case that happens with the Navajo. With Navajo, they, like I saw in the news, they were they were detained and by ICE. And I mean, where in the world are they gonna go? This is their country.
Build a little bit on what Ercala said. I think there's something more to sustaining the law than just obeying the law. I think if we look back at Dr. Martin Luther King, there's the idea that we want a just law. And sometimes to have the law be just, we have to push against it. The church has a history of doing this successfully and unsuccessfully. We have sponsored test cases before. Other churches have done the same thing. To the extent that the scriptures require us to welcome the stranger, to shelter the stranger. In fact, Jesus, through his parables, tells us that those who don't sustain the stranger are going to be on his left hand, and that's not the right hand to be on. So I think that the church can legitimately say, within the context at least of religion, these laws criminalizing aid to immigrants are unconstitutional. They infringe deeply on important held religious beliefs. I mean, the country has the ability to enact laws that I think are bad, but churches are in a special position. And we found that the courts are willing to go with this. So the Arizona Universalist Unitarians who were leaving food and water for immigrants, it's not fun to be a test case. It's not fun to be prosecuted criminally. But they ended up winning so far, at the district court level at least, that they had a religious Freedom Restoration Act right to act on their beliefs and to prevent immigrants from dying of hunger and thirst. I think that the church, if it were challenged, I'm not sure what administration really wants to be seen as invading a church and imprisoning clergy whose crime is helping people in need. I think that that's a very sympathetic case for the church, especially in light of courts in the Supreme Court that seem very comfortable expanding religious liberty rights.
Sam, I'm going to ask a question. It's kind of blunt, but I just want to ask, okay? It seems to need...
Yeah.
Are members, Latter-day Saints, who support the deportation of undocumented immigrants wrong?
Yes.
To explain why you think they're wrong.
Okay, so that you ask a blunt question, I give you a blunt answer. Let me walk back the answer a little bit. I think that countries have a right to enact immigration laws. You spoke in the introduction about whether political lines really matter for God's purposes. I'd say no, but political lines do matter. And there are legitimate reasons for these laws. I don't like them. I don't like the way they're written. But I think that as members of the church, I guess I would say that members of the church in good faith, in good conscience, can support immigration laws and immigration restrictions. I don't think in good conscience we can call ICE on our co-congregants. I don't think in good conscience, I don't think that we can be saved if we do that. I think that flies directly in the face of commands that Jesus has given in the New Testament, that prophets have given in the Old Testament, that prophets have given in the Book of Mormon. I think there is a special solicitude for immigrants in basically all Scripture. I mean, we were once metaphorically as the house of Israel, not quite as literally, but we were strangers in a strange land. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have experienced being pushed out, being immigrants and being refugees. I don't think in good conscience we can impose that on our fellow saints. I would expand it to our neighbors, period. I know some people listening are going to disagree with me on the line. I think it's really hard to disagree with me on the core concept, though.
Okay, so since writing about immigration, of course, we've gotten tons of what I would have to call our bigoted views of immigrants from Latter-day Saints, saying they should all go back, they're terrible, they're destroying our country. What do you think? How could the church, and these are our church members who are writing these things to us, how could the church counter those views? What should the church do to make it clear that wherever you stand on policy, those views are not okay?
I think, and I'll defer to Edikala if she has different views on this, I think the church needs to issue a blunt statement from the First Presidency, from the highest levels, a statement saying basically that, irrespective of what you think about what the law is and what the law should be, treating neighbors, treating immigrants, irrespective of their immigration status, as second-class or worse citizens is incompatible with being a good member of the church. President Hinckley made a pretty good statement on race, I want to say the early 2010s. And I think a similar statement, it doesn't have to be word for word, but a similar statement on immigrants would be, I don't know that it would fix the problem, because we all have the ability to be racist and xenophobic if we want. A church statement standing alone won't fix that. But I think at least on the margins, for the people whose views aren't hardened, who aren't who can change, I think that kind of statement would be tremendously valuable and relatively effective.
Well, what I can say about that is that it all comes down to do not judge. Do not judge. If you see a member on a Sunday in a store, do not judge because you don't know what's behind. You completely don't know. You don't know what's behind the reason of that person coming here in this country. You don't know if they're fearing for their life, if they're here because they want to, sustain their families. They cannot do that in their country. You don't know if they come here to do crime. You don't know if they come here to, you don't know if that's going to be our next president. You don't know if, it's millions and millions of reasons that a human being cannot imagine or cannot know. So you need to just not judge. And if you break that, you are not going, what Sam says, you're not going to be safe because you're judging one person. And then it says, I believe the scripture says that you're going to be judged the same way. If you, the same way you judge others, or probably harder than that. What for my understanding.
I think also as members and as people, we need to recognize how much luck has factored into this. I'm a U.S. citizen because I was born to U.S. citizens in Santa Monica, California. Nothing I did. A lot of the people that I attended church with from Venezuela were in the United States because by foot they crossed the Darien Gap. By foot and on buses, they went through Central America, they went through Mexico, they crossed rivers that went up to their waists, they carried small children with them. They've worked a lot harder to be here than I had to work, that by luck of who I was born to and where I was born. And I think as we think, again, to Etikala's point, we don't know why people came, although we do in many cases know why people came. It turns out that this is a pretty cool country with a lot of opportunity for a lot of people, and the capacity to have more people. But also, many of these immigrants, documented or not, worked a lot harder to get here than those of us who might be judging them.
So, Sam, you alluded to this earlier, but I want to drill down on this a little bit more because it jumped out at me when I saw what the church issued. The church values religious liberty. We know that. They give major speeches on it. They've gone to court to advocate and defend it. Wouldn't allowing ICE to enter chapels or even temples to make arrests amount to an infringement on those religious liberties? What should it do instead?
I mean, what I think it should do is, if an ICE agent make an announcement, make a public announcement that ICE is not welcome into our churches without a judicial warrant. If ICE comes to a church building or to the temple, I mean, we're polite people, politely ask them to show their warrant, to sit down and call, and then if they have a warrant, call an attorney. I mean, call church headquarters or a local attorney that's been designated to get representation there. And then if they have a judicial warrant, probably comply with the law, because as much as I am interested in the religious liberty aspect of things, it's not an immutable right. There are situations in which other concerns can trump religious liberty. We know that. But I would focus on making sure that if ICE is going to come in, if we're going to let them onto sacred space in infringement of our religious liberty, that they've jumped through all the hoops necessary to step on that.
But you talked about earlier on this, even before I think the church issued statements about denying, not allowing a member to take the sacrament, for instance, would be a denial of a religious liberty, right? I mean, so you're saying if they have a warrant, that's different?
So, the way I will go with what the Chicago public schools are doing. Chicago public schools, because the Trump administration revoked a policy that mostly prevented ICE from going to sensitive areas, which were defined as churches, schools, I think hospitals, and a couple other places. Previously, they could still go there and make arrests, but they had to get signed off by a much higher level person. And now they say it's within the ICE agent's judgment. So Chicago Public Schools policy is if ICE agents show up, they need to show a warrant. If the warrant is signed by a judge, not an administrative warrant signed by ICE, but actually signed by a judge, then ICE can enter. They can infringe on this space. And this is not good. This necessarily freaks out justifiably children from a place that should be safe. But ultimately, the way that our law works is a warrant signed by a judge is good enough to enter places that you can't otherwise enter. I don't think that the church should say that ICE can enter into, or even enter into public areas of church buildings without a warrant. If they have a warrant, that's why you call some attorney, you call counsel, because at that point it gets way above the pay grade of the bishop. So I think that even with the warrant, that is an infringement on religious liberty, but I'm not a religious liberty absolutist. I recognize that there are times when it is within the state's rights to infringe on religious liberty.
Okay, so last question for both of you. What, if anything, would you like to see specifically church leaders do to help its undocumented members? Eric Holla, do you have a final statement about what you'd like to see the church do to help?
Well, I think Sam just said it. It will be very helpful, and even it's not only for undocumented, it's for the kids, for they're more vulnerable, they're gonna suffer a lot to see that in church. They are suffering seeing that at school and everywhere. I cannot imagine if they see that in church, that they arrest their father or their friend father or mother. So I think the church should fight a little bit more, push back for us and for everyone, because it's not just as I just say, it's not just for us immigrants, it's for everybody, and then also provide counsel. I know they have resources, but specifically for this damage that has been doing been doing to the kids. So I think not profiling, or try to figure it out, as Sam says, a way to not make the people feel like they're being profiled and the church cannot do anything. The church is just with hands up and cannot do anything. I think that's what I would like to see the church do.
Sam?
And my wish list would be 2 or 3 things. One would be to revoke this policy from last week and go back to its previous policy of immigration status blind aid. I think that would be better for immigrants and better for local leadership. The second thing is I would like to see them, and it's not that point yet, but I would like to see them either join the Quakers in their challenge of, I can't remember if we talked about this, but the Quakers filed a lawsuit on religious liberty grounds challenging this revocation of the sensitive spaces policy. Mm-hmm. I would love to see the church file a sister lawsuit to that, or as it goes up, file an amicus brief with the court. I'd love to see the church extend it, like arguments for the religious liberty to not have immigration generally enter into religious spaces. And then the third thing, which I hadn't thought about because you mentioned it, Peggy, I would love to hear the church, issue a statement condemning xenophobia and racism toward immigrants on the basis, the immigrants generally, and or on the basis of immigration status.
Atakala Herrera Urena and Sam Brunson, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And thanks to Peggy Fletcher Stack.
Always a pleasure.
And to our producer, Chris Samuels. We remind you that you can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.